Discord? Why does every pony immediately assume that this has something to do with me?
Well, who else would be responsible for an abomination giant apple monster that roams around town saying Sugar Belle's name? Yes, but he was literally assigned a task to place all the apples in specific locations. So, recapping Big Mac and Sugar Belle, I stated that these two have become one of my favorite couples in the series. They share enough differences where they can adapt to any challenge they are faced with, and they share a lot in common with what they like to do and utilize them to bring their connections together. Through the ups and downs, Big Mac stepped out of his comfort zone and hard to say anything to be upfront with Sugar about his honesty. At the same time, he had to confront another stallion and learn to separate fiction from reality to understand what's best. He faced his lowest point in the breakup breakdown, where he was under the negative impression that Sugar was going to leave him, and he had to face his fear by talking to her about the decision, resulting in a huge miscommunication. And now, the arc comes to a close with Big Mac bringing out the question to Sugar and making the most exciting moment in their lives, the Big Mac question. This would not only be the final episode that concluded their adorable arc, but this was the final slice of life episode before the series finale. That is such a way to go out with a bang. As such, this would rank as one of my favorite episodes, not just from season 9, but in the entire show. The way everything is presented here is in the same formula of what the Saddle Row review had, exchanging different viewpoints that provide plot threads through flashbacks on how each end failed their contributions. This ideal framing is what I loved about the Saddle Row review, but I found it weird at first when it was used here. However, what worked were two reasons. Firstly, it was to share the viewer foreshadowing detail on what hysteria was yet to come, and thus preparing for a wild ride. And the second comes to a major payoff at the end, as I'll put a pin on it for now. We first begin with Discord and Spike. Through a game of charades, Big Mac explains his plan where he builds a picnic table on a hilltop to set a lunch where he would propose. And along with that, he wants Sugar to follow a trail of apples with riddle notes attached to the stems as they would lead her to the said hilltop. The table he plans on building was based on the shelf that he made for her in Hard to Say Anything. Aside from an earlier episode reference, he tends to make a flashback from when they first met. As part of the contribution, Spike volunteers to get the food while Discord is assigned to get the said trail of apples all over Ponyville. I once again enjoy the interactions between Spike and Discord. Unlike the Optimus and Sinus roles though, this time they are confronted with trust issues with each other as things go out of hand, and as a result, they both are at fault for what follows. When the first apple is placed on the porch at Sugar Cube Corner, Sugar Belle and the CMC pass it without notice. Discord insists on giving it to her directly so that she'll be drawn to the trail. But Spike argues, claiming it won't be as romantic. I see where Spike is coming from. Having riddles scattered around town is an exciting, if silly, experience where Sugar is being led to a surprise outcome. Honestly, however, I agreed with Discord more. You have so many apples all over Ponyville, let alone taking notice of one single apple, someone else may spot it by accident and ruin the flow. So the idea of having it romantic by not directly handing the apple to her would be kind of fruitless in the long run. No pun intended. Regardless, Discord proceeds with the plan of getting Sugar Belle to take notice the second time, and as expected, she overlooks it again. So as an alternative, Discord breaks the rules by bringing the apples to life and assigns them to be at their locations, only to cause trouble. As much as I can understand his frustration here, he's also at fault for not thinking things through. The apples were not really specified on who to turn to or what to do whenever they reached the location. At the very least, he admits to that, but as always, it's in his nature to be stubborn and think about himself. On the contrary, these living apples were hilarious to watch as they inadvertently cause all kinds of havoc in the market. It's part of what makes the journey of the episode such a wild ride. Meanwhile, Spike makes his own screw-up by being overly eager, impatient, and keeping the proposal plans to himself. So much so that he attempted to transport a bowl of messages by using his fire breath, only to burn all the messages that Mrs. Cake made. Oof. To add insult to injury, he criticizes Mrs. Cake about the quality of the said desserts. This comes off as Spike being caught in so much pressure that he couldn't follow everything as planned either, failing to get the food prepared and messing up what Mrs. Cake planned. As a result, his own impatience and timidness of planning alternatively was his obstacle, as Discord's was the opposite, breaking rules for the alternative and not thinking things through, and being somewhat of a loudmouth.
Big Mac is going to propose to Sugar Belle. Sugar Belle. Sugar Belle. Sugar Belle.
So coming to the next batch of characters to share their side of the story, the Cutie Mark Crusaders were helping Sugar Belle and Mrs. Cake. We learned that, unsurprisingly, all the desserts were for Sugar Belle's proposal plan to Big Mac by luring him to Sugar Cube Corner, and all the messages that were planted in there were single words formed into a sentence.
I love you, Big Mac. Would you like to spend the rest of our lives together? I hope you say yup. And each word has to go into a dessert? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Whoa, 21, I know. Actually, it's 22.
Okay, I know he's someone with a few words, but holy shit, Sugar Belle, that's overdoing it. And to think Big Mac's Apple messages were ridiculous. Good grief. Can you even afford all those desserts being made? I hope you prepared a huge paycheck for Mrs. Cake. To their credit, they have the same wonderful and excited intention as Big Mac did, base their plan on their personality. Big Mac's callback to Sugar Belle's display as a sign of support, and her play-up of his personality with a few words are both adorable in their own right. It's a lot of thought that the writers put into making something extravagant and consistent with these two admired each other's roots. Even being more prepared, Sugar assigns an apple pie to the CMC containing an invitation that calls back to the Breakup Breakdown, where her package got misshipped. Instead of relying on the delivery ponies, she puts her trust into the CMC to get it to Big Mac. But even putting all that aside, their thematically plans where their hearts were in the right place, but it was executed poorly in practice. Just comes to show that excitement clouds the unfortunate reality. Regarding the CMC's motives, I heavily appreciate that they were contributing their best and hoping not to screw up, especially since they mention and acknowledge that they have been clumsy at handling adult issues. However, while it is nice to know that they are trying their best, I feel they're too hard on themselves in terms of writing. While they did have their screw-ups, not everything was their fault. In fact, I never did see how they failed near the end of this episode. They were just looking for Big Mac to give him a pie. Regardless, there were a lot of occasions where they succeeded in helping people in the series. It's the very core of how they got their cutie marks in Crusaders of the Lost Mark. I have a personal beef with that one, but now's not the time.
Uh-oh, Spike and Discord are outside. If they figure out what we're up to, they'll spill the beans, and I want this to be a surprise.
And this ties together how Sugar missed the first Apple message, and this is where I talk about an obstacle that was rather annoying and felt a bit shoehorned over the plot of this episode. Trust issues. It made sense with Discord and Spike when it came to their trust, but compared to everyone else involved, this was a legit issue to me. They all know Big Mac and Sugar Belle's relationship, and they respect the said relationship. This was made clear during the Breakup Breakdown when Spike tried supporting Big Mac, and when Sugar was told by Mrs. Cake about Tone. And despite Discord's antics, he still had his support through his mischievous ways. The fact that neither side trusts each other in this episode comes off rather dismissive and arbitrary. It also doesn't make sense for Mrs. Cake to allow Spike in the back of Sugar Cube Corner if they don't want to risk having their proposal plan ruined. All the messages alone would have been read by Spike because the bowl was out wide open. At the very least, I found it hilarious at how oblivious everyone was by what they were focused on. And additionally, when their excitement gets too carried away.
I can't believe I'm gonna have a sister-in-law!
Yeah, like with Discord, each side has their own flaws that complement the episode's narrative. It would have been nice to have their impulses worked on too, instead of just having them be side jokes. As the CMC look for Big Mac, they go all over the place, and it becomes the weakest point in the episode. As they arrive at Sweet Apple Acres, Scootaloo notices Big Mac's blueprint on the barn and doesn't piece together why it's being built. On the one hand, it's a reminder to the audience on what's happening overall. But on the other hand, it's the CMC being clueless as well as their search all over the place, going to the bowling alley, Fluttershy's Animal Sanctuary, and the spa. It almost feels unnecessary and out of place since the episode is supposed to center on 2 locations. It's not the same thing as being oblivious to being focused on the task at hand, and rather it just feels like an afterthought. At the end of the day, it's very typical of the CMC to do something like this, and I at least chuckled. Thankfully, things pick up when they head back to Sweet Apple Acres again to ask Granny Smith where Big Mac is.
Hey there, little dumpling. I just had the most peculiar dream.
That's nice, Granny, but we really need to find Big Mac, so...
It was about Grandpa, but it wasn't. And we were in outer space on some kind of mission to explore a strange new world.
Granny, either you ate something odd in an apple dish or you secretly obsess over astronomy. Which I can't blame you for. I love astronomy. Regardless, their story comes to a close as a giant apple monster arrives at Discord's expense, chasing them at Sugar Cube Corner where the others were, and thus everything is ruined. As expected, they all argue, but also admit fault afterwards. Discord being responsible for the giant apple monster, Spike burning all the messages in Mrs. Cake's desserts, and Mrs. Cake herself when she admits that she overestimated the consequences of baking over 20 of them.
I shouldn't have taken all those desserts at once. It's just, how can you say no to such a sweet idea? Oh, sweet! I made a joke.
Okay, Mrs. Cake, with all due respect, that was a forced pun. I know you're trying to cheer up the moment, but you know what? Have your moment. You pushed yourself baking more than you can taste anyway. Hey, dude, I was just trying to be sincere for once. Cut me some slack. Finally coming full circle, we're centered on Big Mac and Sugar Belle as they walk together to the apple pear tree, and what follows is a conversation on different viewpoints on how disastrous their plans turned out. What Big Mac says hits home so hard with me at what he has to say.
I'm sorry, Sugar Belle. I wanted everything to go right today. I wanted our love to be as perfect as my parents' was when they planted these 2 trees together. Instead, it turned into a mess, just like when I asked you out, just like Hearts and Hooves Day. No matter how hard I try, I always seem to mess up when it comes to you.
On the surface, he explains things from a half-empty glass perspective over the entirety of his interaction with Sugar, how everything is a disappointment in his eyes, and that nothing turned out as perfect as he had planned, wanting everything to be great for Sugar because of how dedicated he was willing to be. But on a personal note, this is very relatable on how easy it is for me to see the negative side of everything. There's an expectation I used to have where I assume the best to happen, only to fall apart because of how much I delude myself. That's why most of the time I'm either assuming the worst or just thinking negatively so that I won't have any hope shot down. Every time I think of something with determination, I fear someone or something comes in the fray, and then I realize how much of a fool I feel. I know it's silly and I shouldn't bring my personal feelings here, but the point is I know how Big Mac feels. He loves her and wants to make everything right, therefore expecting everything to be right through excitement that clouds the facts. And this aftermath is very frustrating to him to make the journey a smooth sailing for his relationship. But as explained by Sugar Belle, Bright Mac and Pear Butter went through such a hardship in their lives. No need to explain there if you saw the perfect pair. Let alone relationships, that makes a big point on a general basis this episode illustrated. Everything is not always going to go as planned, if not ever. Big Mac's plan didn't go accordingly, Sugar Belle's plan didn't go accordingly, and everyone who contributed stumbled upon an issue that conflicted themselves and the environment around them. Thus, everyone else failed accordingly. All the hysteria that followed in this episode's journey makes that point so clear, and it hits close to home. There are times in our lives when something really big is planned, and if everything fails, it's a big pill to swallow. That's what makes the framing work so well with everyone sharing their perspective through the flashbacks. And on that note, this is where the episode brings that big payoff. Applejack was listening to all their stories as she represented the audience. I already stated in the past that I take issue with Applejack being called a background pony, and that's mainly because her support with the main characters was coming off dismissive, as if she's just a filler and adds nothing. Background ponies only fill in the void, and Applejack is a shit ton better than that. But what I appreciate here is that she was being an open ear, and that's not what a background pony does. So shut it! Coming to a much brighter note, Big Mac and Sugar Belle come to a happy state when...
On 3,
Sure. 1.
2,
Will you marry me? Yep.
Ugh. Holy crap, that was a load of wholesomeness to handle. And speaking of wholesomeness, the episode ends with a wedding ceremony. This alone is what I love so much about this episode, as the majority of the narrative is filled to the brim with hilarious mishaps, carrying a deep message about how to cope with any failures. This ending segment was beyond rewarding. It makes me so happy for these two after all the troubles they dealt with, as well as the many obstacles over the course of this arc. Comparatively, a lot of other arcs I've seen or anticipated to in the show have been met with a lukewarm or disappointing outcome. But this arc was simple with only 3 episodes, and I was glad that the writers were able to put the effort to make this one work. And this episode easily comes out on top. It was a hilarious ride where contributing characters did their best with an even amount of screen time. The side jokes, while they had room for being utilized better, were still funny regardless. And it overall was a rewarding experience by a wholesome conclusion. Definitely what I meant when I said it ended with a bang before the series finale. And on that note, while the 2 previous arc episodes don't match up as my favorites, I still enjoy those 2, and still have a bigger respect for them now because of the lead up to this one. Thus being one of my favorite episodes of not just Season 9, but also one of my favorite episodes of the show. Until next time, this is GoldenFox, and take care.